Now, Football versus Transphobia's week of action aims to promote a welcoming and inclusive culture for trans and non-binary people in the sport.
This is the campaign's 6th year, and it's arguably more urgent than ever. Football's main anti-discrimination body, Kick It Out, have received more reports of transphobic abuse this season than any since their formation 31 years ago. It's been a sharp and recent rise too, with reports up over 150% compared to this stage last year. Football versus Homophobia, who campaign specifically on LGBTQ+ inclusion, have received as many reports of transphobic abuse as the last 4 years put together. Overall abuse is up 150% year on year, with social media abuse up 160%. Well, Natalie Washington from Football v Transphobia joins us now. Good morning to you, Natalie. Those statistics paint a pretty bleak picture. How accurately do they reflect the experience for a trans person in football?
Yeah, thank you. I think sadly, look, a lot of transgender people in football will recognise that. I think, in wider society, we're seeing a huge growth in abuse and harassment and discrimination directed against the transgender community, right from, Parliament all the way down. We're seeing, trans people being the butt of jokes, being subjected to sort of unwelcome questioning. So I think in football, sadly, it's no surprise that we see that as well. But I think whether, we see players being abused on the pitch. We've heard reports of people in the stands hearing, transphobic language directed at them and directed more generally. And of course, as you say, social media has become this real sort of gauntlet to run for trans people in terms of, navigating around trolls, transphobic abuse. So I think, sadly, that's absolutely what we're seeing on the ground as well.
Your secretary pushed for an outright ban. The FA defended their policy and referenced, quote, a very small population of transgender women. And yet, to quote Football v Homophobia, this has become a culture war. So how has this happened?
Yeah, and look, as you say, transgender women are a very small percentage of the population, right? So typically in football day-to-day, people aren't encountering trans people. There are very few trans players in the women's leagues in this country. I think the highest that we know of is probably people around tier 5. So we're not seeing this sort of invasion that we've been told to expect. And in fact, trans women have been playing in the women's leagues for decades in many senses. I think what's happening here is that, as I've said before, in wider society, trans identity is a very hot topic. There is a lot of people who are let's be honest, there are people who are scaremongering for sort of social, cultural, political gain. And sport is seen as across the years has been seen as a potential lever for social change, both for good and for bad. And if you can push people out of sport, then you can marginalise them in society. You can, push their voices out of the limelight. You can make sure that those people don't have the sort of opportunities and that opportunity to get that sort of social, cultural, physical benefits that we all get from sport. And I think a lot of it comes down to sport being seen as this, clash of bodies, this space where physiology is so important. And so for people who are looking to sort of marginalise trans people in society, that's a good place to start, because a lot of people who haven't, seen the research and who don't understand what this means for people on the ground think, oh yeah, well, of course it's unfair for trans people to participate. It's a quote unquote common sense idea, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. But sport is seen as this really great jumping off point. And I think that's why we're seeing it as this kind of really central battleground in sort of the trans rights argument at the moment.
And finally, Natalie, moving to the kind of professional game, clubs have put out some very powerful anti-discrimination campaigns in other areas. So how can Football v Transphobia help clubs who do want to make a difference?
Yeah, and football clubs really sit at the centre of their communities, right? So it's a really important way of helping people feel connected to their wider community. So clubs have a really important role to play here, as do leagues and FAs. And what they can do is, first of all, they can stand against abuse. whatever you think of competitive policy or anything like that, I would hope most people can reasonably agree that trans people shouldn't be subjected to transphobic abuse. And so clubs can make sure that they're highlighting the reporting mechanisms that exist, kick it out being obviously the one we're talking about here, and we would encourage people to report transphobic abuse through those processes. They can make sure that they're, providing inclusive spaces. So, for example, if it's possible for them to have gender-neutral toilets for people to use when they're, watching football, that helps a lot of people go to football who wouldn't otherwise be able to because they're not sure if they'd be able to use a toilet while they're there. They can publish stuff on, in grounds and on social media saying that we support trans people, we see you, we're here for you, you're welcome in our ground, you're welcome in our club, you're welcome in our organisation. And I think making that positive stance, taking that positive stand to say, hey, we value trans people and we want you here is really important at the moment, because even that is getting a lot of pushback. And so standing against people who don't want trans people there is really important. And we need those allies because, as you say, we're a very small community.
Natalie, it's a really important topic and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.